Hello, everyone, and welcome to the side event on shifting public support policies towards a clean and just energy transition in the Global South. I am Miquel Muñoz Cabré, a senior scientist at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and I will be moderating this event. Today, for the next 60 minutes, we have a very packed agenda with very interesting speakers and panelists, so thank you for coming and I hope you enjoy. This side event explores the potential and the conditions for enabling a fossil fuel-free, clean and just development pathway in the Global South, with an emphasis on the Global South and on fossil fuel. This is how this event is going to be organized. First, we will have two presentations from IISD, International Institute for Sustainable Development, and IASS, the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies. This will be followed by a panel discussion in which you are all welcome to put your questions, welcome and encouraged to put your questions in the chat. This side event has been jointly co-organized by IISD, IASS, and the government of Nepal. I will be introducing the speakers before their presentation and the panelists before the panel discussion. And without further ado, we will start with the first panelist, Lucille Dufour. Lucille Dufour is a senior policy advisor at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, where she focuses her work, among other things, on fossil fuel production, and she has been a lead author at the Production Gap Report recently launched, and she's also leading the Energy Policy Tracker. Lucille will be presented on the potential for shifting public support from gas to clean energy in the Global South. Lucille, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miquel. Really glad to be on this event. So as you quickly presented, ISD has really put some thoughts in the past months on how to promote a clean development pathway in the Global South. And we wanted to focus specifically on the role of international public finance in that question, because we think that international public finance can play a key role in shaping the energy landscape in the Global South. And so this is the reason why we published a report in June this year, which is called Step Off the Gas, and which looks into the role of gas in the Global South and also the role of clean alternatives. And I'm really glad to present the key findings of this report to you today. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we wanted to do when looking into the role of international public finance was to look into the trends. And we've studied the trends of international public finance flows between 2017 and 2019, and what we found was pretty striking. We found that international public finance invested in fossil fuels is twice as high as for clean energy. And this is what you can see on the chart in the right side of this slide. And what we find particularly interesting or striking is that this trend is specifically true for gas. You can see the first bar on the left in that graph that shows that gas projects in the Global South received more international public finance than any other source of energy, and even 4 times as much as wind and solar, which you can see also on the chart, are receiving very little amounts on the period that we studied. We obviously think that these kind of trends can have dire consequences, both in terms of the economic situation for countries in the Global South, but also in terms of global climate trends. In terms of economic implications, obviously, most of the energy scenarios out there compatible with 1.5 degrees show that there is a steep fall in fossil fuel usage by 2030, which could obviously create a risk of stranded assets for the new fossil fuel infrastructure built in the Global South using international public finance. And obviously, in terms of the climate science, the latest energy scenarios, including the International Energy Agency's net zero scenarios, state that there is no need for new investment in new oil and gas fields after 2021. So that really reinforces the need to make this shift happen from fossil fuel support from international public finance institutions towards clean energy. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the key question, which is gas needed? And there is a common belief that, asserts that gas can be used as a bridge fuel in the global south, and actually our research shows the opposite. What we find is that gas is not needed in the global south because for most of its uses, clean energy alternatives are already cost competitive or are about to be in the next couple of years or in the next decades. And this is especially true for the biggest uses of gas in the global south, including power generation and heating. And this is what we can see in the charts on the right side of the screen. We have these clean energy alternatives that are already cheaper. And they are not only cheaper, but are also a better solution to promote and enable and respond to the energy access needs in the global south, including clean electricity access and clean and safe solution cookings in developing countries. And this is because these kind of clean energy alternatives are more modular and are better suited, for instance, to provide energy access in remote areas where most of the populations who don't yet have access to energy are situated. Next slide, please. So, and this is where obviously we ask ourselves the question, what is the role of international public finance? And this is one of our key report findings. We have identified 4 areas in which there are still challenges to the deployment of clean energy, but in which international public finance could help unlock further deployment through targeted investment. And these 4 areas include obviously delivering on energy access, and I just talked about it, with this need to focus investments notably in the least developed countries where the energy needs are the greatest. The second area is de-risking private investment because investors still perceive a high risk in investing in clean energy alternatives in developing countries, but also being able to consider concessional finance solutions, especially for the most vulnerable countries that really need the deployment of clean energy in a rapid term. The third area is enabling grid integration to make up for the variability of clean energy sources, and especially to avoid to use some solutions such as building new gas peak power plants whose operation costs are extremely high and are not cost competitive anymore, and the right solution to make up for this variability of renewable energy. And finally, the fourth area is technology transfer to enable an economic diversification in the global south and promote technological development at the local level. And next slide, please. And that brings me to the last slide of my presentation, which are the recommendations that we have developed in our reports, and that are really aimed at thinking about how can the shift be most effective. So the first thing that we recommend to international public finance institutions is really to scale up clean energy finance, especially in the areas that I've mentioned in the last slide. The second one is obviously to end support to fossil fuels, and especially gas, and that could free up obviously money to scale up these clean energy investments. And this is really aligned with some of the developments that we're expecting at COP tomorrow, with the launch of this UK-led statement on ending international public finance. So really keen to hear the panelists' thoughts about this in this statement. And finally, a key consideration that we want to take into account is obviously the just transition and equity perspective. And this is something that I'm sure Lima will talk about in her presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lucille. Thanks, Lucille, for a very thought-provoking presentation. So basically, developing countries, we heard gas is not needed. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion in the panel. So thank you very much. I would like now to introduce the next speaker. The next speaker is Lima Ecke, Ecke, sorry if I mispronounced. She's a research associate at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, IASS, and also fellow at the Harvard University Kennedy School. Her work focuses on the decarbonization processes, the systemic implications, and the chances and risks of different pathways for countries worldwide. And we're going to hear from Lima, and she's going to introduce the Energy Justice Index. Lima, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and also a warm welcome to everyone from my side. I'm very happy to present you a recent work that me and my colleagues at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies have been working on during the past month, which is an energy justice index to monitor the energy transition in the Global South. On the next slide, you can see that, well, we start from the premise that the energy transition accelerates around the globe. And from our viewpoint, we need to engage in much more debates around not only that we want to achieve that kind of transition, but also what kind of transition is it that currently is occurring, and what pathways and policies are taken. And there are really trade-offs and differences among different pathways that could be taken during this transition process. And there are several questions that concern energy justice connected to this process. So, for example, questions like who takes decisions, what about young and marginalized groups in these processes, but also what are gains and losses of different energy systems and how are they distributed among societal groups. On the next slide, you can see, maybe you can click once more, sorry, that while we designed this energy justice index with a focus on developing countries, and we want to measure two different elements. One is current energy transition policies. To what extent do they cover and concern energy justice issues? But also we want to look at outcomes of transition processes in terms of really on the ground, how do different metrics change? And it is the first index to offer such a dynamic view of energy justice processes within a country, and also to take a developing country perspective in particular. On the next slide, you can see our conceptualization of the index. Maybe you can just click a couple of times until everything appears. So our index is built out of 30 indicators, and we used quantitative metrics, but also in-depth country research and qualitative interviews to compile the data. And so far we started doing this for 4 countries in the Global South, namely Kenya, Chile, Malaysia, and Jordan. But we want to extend it in the future also to further countries. And the Energy Justice Index is comprised of 3 core tenets describing different elements of the concept of energy justice. So one would be procedural justice, that is concerned with equitable procedures that engage all stakeholders in a non-discriminatory way. A second element concerns recognitional justice. So this concerns the fair representation of different societal groups in decision-making. And a third tenet describes distributional justice that concerns the allocation of benefits, but also losses in transition processes. And here also, for example, the phase out of fossil fuels might be one thing that really is reflected in how intergenerational justice also is addressed within a country as an allocation of further burdens for future generations. So that is a little bit how this metric comes into play here. On the next slide, you can just have a quick overview about different applications that we envisioned for this index. So it provides evidence and a quantified metric that does not exist so far to measure really the energy justice situation in different countries and over time. And you can really, it helps to grasp, below you see just 2 different representations of the assessments we did for Jordan and Chile. And I won't go due to the time really in depth into the different results for the different countries, but I just wanted to show you that it really helps to visually also grasp quite fast, like which areas of energy addresses might need more attention in policymaking, and which areas might be further addressed. And it can raise awareness to the overall importance of energy justice and contribute to discussions on also how energy justice relates to concepts of climate and environmental justice, and just help to build more evidence-based sound policies to address the transition. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or also want to follow our publications, you can visit us, our website, and also email me or follow us on Twitter. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and also to hear how you and your practices maybe engage with energy transition questions, and whether you think such a metric might actually help to improve policy making and maybe also funding and finance questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lima, for a great presentation, and it's very, very also thought-provoking. We all hear about the just transition, but how do we measure it, and what do we measure? I think that's a critical work. So thank you for that. So now we're going to enter in the second part of our side event, which is the panel discussion. We have arranged a very interesting array of panelists, and we thank them for being here because they have very busy schedules. So I'm going to introduce them in a moment. Before that, I just want to say we're going to have the panelists. We're going to start with, I'm going to pose a question to each of them to get the discussion started. And then we're going to engage into a rapid fire session, questions. So you're very welcome, the participants here and in the other channels, you're welcome to pose your questions in the chat or through other means, which will be communicated to us, and we'll pose those to the panelists. And after the panelists have spoke, we also invite of course, the presenters to intervene. So this panel, it's a representation of government, civil society, and multilateral development banks. I would like to introduce you to Nawar Rash Dakal, and he's the Deputy Executive Director from the Alternative Energy Promotion Center in Nepal. And he has over 18 years of experience in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate finance. He's our first panelist. He's joining us from an airport, so we're really grateful. The second panelist is Maria Di Paola, and she's the Research Area Director from the Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales in Argentina, which is the leading think tank on environmental issues in Argentina. And she works on fossil fuel subsidies and analyzing the national budgets and the impacts in general, climate change in general. And she just published a paper that came out yesterday, so we're very happy about that and interesting to see it. And then our last participant, who right now is stuck in a negotiation, but she just joined us, excellent, is Nancy Saich. She's the climate change expert from the European Investment Bank, and she's responsible for leading the work on Paris alignment with other MDBs, climate finance definitions, and impact reporting. So I'm going to pose my first question to Nawar Rash from Nepal. And the first question to Nawar is, how is the government of Nepal taking action to implement policies aiming at a just and clean energy transition? Nawar Rash, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting session. Very delighted to hear two very concise and very enlightening presentations, and thank you for the question. Actually, before I directly go into your question, a very brief background about Nepal's energy situation. Our energy, total energy consumption is still predominated by traditional biomass, which is firewood, agricultural residue, and dry dung, which covers nearly 69% of the total energy consumption. And petroleum products, which are 100% imported, cover around 19% of the total energy consumed. So these two are the critical areas that government is currently trying to address in the energy transition discussion. Basically, the biomass is going mainly for the cooking in the households, but also in heating and industrial and other applications. So for that, we are now targeting to introduce electricity-based cooking, and our second NDC, which was submitted to UNFCCC in December 2020, aims to have electric cooking as a primary mode of cooking in 25% of the households by 2030. Uh, of course, in electric cooking, there are certain issues that we still need to address properly, especially on the reliability, quality, and the tariffs areas. But we are working very closely with the ministry, with the regulatory commission and related stakeholders, and with the utility as well as stakeholders on the ground. And we hope that we will get to there. And secondly, especially in the transport sector, where most of the imported petroleum products go, we want to really make big transformation by introducing electric vehicles. By 2030, we aim to have 90% of all the new purchase of vehicles to be electric. And towards that direction also, we are working very closely with the utility to have the charging stations as a major infrastructures available everywhere, and working with stakeholders who are working towards the automobiles to introduce variety of electric vehicles and uh, really make them available to the users, as well as building the confidence of users, so that the electric vehicles can really sort of meet the primary needs of the people.
Thank you, Nawaraj. Very, very interesting. I'm gonna, since I mentioned that Nawaraj is joining us from an airport and may have to leave us to board a plane, I'm gonna pose another question we got to him before I move to the next panelists. So one question we have is, well, double question. First, what kind of international support is needed in Nepal to remove the remaining barriers to the deployment of renewable energies? And also, if you're talking about electric cooking, how do you link that to renewable energy for off-grid? Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, out of the total population, 93% of the population in Nepal have access to electricity as of now, of which 85% from grid and around 8% from off-grid. Now the grid expansion is happening very aggressively. We aim to have 100% electrification in next 2 years' time. But making electric cooking as a primary mode of cooking might take time for everyone to happen. So that's why this target of 25% only for the primary mode of cooking comes. And when it comes to type of support, the NDC document itself, it has set a quite ambitious target as per this raising the ambitions as a motto. 15,000 megawatt electricity generation by 2030, out of which 5 to 10% would be supplied by small scale renewables like micro mini hydro, solar, wind, and bioenergy. But out of that, only 5,000 megawatt is unconditional, and remaining is contingent upon mobilization of finances from internal resources, internal community. So that itself very clearly mentions that we would need to mobilize resources from bilateral, multilateral, or different funding channels that are available internationally. And not only that, mobilizing the international financing would also involve engagement of organizations, capacitating them at different levels in terms of technical capacity, in terms of institutional capacity, policy, regulatory measures, as well as working with the local stakeholders and financing institutions, so that this international finance can be channeled in a proper way. It can be investment for developing the projects or developing the transmission and distribution lines. At the same time, it can also be technical assistance, which can support the capacity building of the sector as a whole.
Thank you, Nawaraj. Really packed with information. I learned a lot. I'm going to pose the next question to the next panelist now, Maria Di Paola from Argentina, from FARN. And the question to you is, what challenges are you experiencing in Argentina for a just and green energy transition? And also, how has international support influenced this? Thank you. Your floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikel, and thank you for the invitation to this panel. For us, it's a huge opportunity to show our work and also to show our concerns around these issues in our country. The economic crisis is one of the key issues that is challenging the just transition agenda in our country. To know, we have right now 10% of unemployment and 40% of the population is living under the poverty line. Also, our external debt is represented by 100% of our GDP. And for example, 61% of the IMF debt is right now in Argentina. So Argentina is in need of foreign exchange, not only to pay these huge debts, but also to finance development. So fossil fuels are presented as the answer for this economic recession, hand by hand with Vaca Muerta. What is Vaca Muerta? Vaca Muerta is the second resource of unconventional gas in the world and the fourth in oil that is based in the northern Patagonia in our country. So Argentina is one of the 4 countries in the world that is commercially developing non-conventional resources. In the government speech, Vaca Muerta will create not only new jobs, but also will enhance Argentina's trade balance, expecting that fossil fuels will surpass the current agribusiness export that represents 60% of our trade balance. So Argentina will become a net exporter of oil and gas and will be setting prices in the international market. What is the big opportunity? Well, the government says that only the 4% of Vaca Muerta is developed at its potential. So even considering these values that is promising, the expected impact in Vaca Muerta of Vaca Muerta in the Argentina GDP, it's only 0.4% per year of our GDP. So the big controversial issue is that fossil fuels are presented as part of the climate solution, within gas as bridge fuel. For that reason, Vaca Muerta and fracking are part of our national contribution and also of the long-term strategies. The commitment on the Committee of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights of the United Nations stressed out in 2014 that exploiting Vaca Muerta will be affecting the enjoyment of economic and social rights by present and future generations. However, governments still believe on developing an economy that is based on fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are a political problem for us. They are rooted in a natural resource development model that is the key challenge to change looking forward this energy transition that we need. This crisis should be considered an opportunity to build a propositive strategy towards a just energy transition, paving the way for investment that are compatible with the international climate commitments and in respect with the rights of territories and the environment.
Thank you, Maria Paula. Sorry, Maria Marta. It says Maria Di Paula, but it's Maria Marta. Our next panelist is Nancy Saich. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Who just joined us. She was very busy in another negotiation. She's I introduced you, but I'm going to repeat for her benefit. She's a climate change expert at the European Investment Bank. And she's responsible for leading the work on Paris alignment and other MDBs, as well as climate finance definitions and impact reporting. So we have a question for you to get started is, what commitments has the IAB taken to shift its support from fossil fuels to renewable energy? And what was the rationale for doing that? And also, I'll just follow up with a second question that came in the chat for you. So Lucille in her presentation mentioned that there's a UK-led statement that's going to be announced tomorrow, I believe, on ending public finance for fossil fuels. So we'd like to see what the EIB role in that is going to be. Thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting EIB to join this event. In terms of your first question, I think all I need to explain is that we did an update of our energy lending policy in 2019. It had been in place for a number of years, and we did a full public consultation. And it was at the same time that there was a discussion about the need for an EU climate bank. And the EIB, that's been doing a huge amount in climate action for a number of years, wanted to showcase really that it was already the EU climate bank, at least largely, because it had a climate strategy from 2015, which said that all sector lending policies had to be informed by the latest science, leading to low carbon pathways, etc. And this really informed our energy lending policy. The public consultation was extremely clear. We had young people protesting outside the bank, and I think the management of the bank clearly understood that this was a moment where the bank had a choice to step up to really be a climate bank. And that is the decision they took. And then that was also approved by our board. And the energy lending policy sets a number of very important new steps for us. Basically, from that point onward, from November 2019, we no longer finance fossil fuel infrastructure of any sort in new projects. There was a grandfathering clause for projects that were already under appraisal by the bank, and they have to come through actually and be approved by the board. Our December board this year will be the very last one. After that, there's no further grandfathering, and every project has to be in line with the energy lending policy. The other thing that was in the energy lending policy was a rather technical thing called the emissions performance standard. Now, we had that before from the 2013 energy lending policy. It was 550 grams per kilowatt hour. In the energy lending policy from 2019, it was reduced to 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And for those of you that are a bit emissions oriented, I'll explain that it excludes all, if you like, unabated fossil fuels. So gas-fired power, conventional gas-fired power, even the most efficient, normal conventional gas-fired power is about 350 grams of CO2. So what it meant was that we can fund, and by the way, it doesn't make any reference to any specific fuel. So it's fully fuel and technology neutral. We see it as an important way to incentivize technological change and change in the power system, to say that if you can be under 250 grams over the economic life of the project, if you have a credible plan and you show how you can do that, you can still be funded by the bank. But the bottom line is that the projects that are now eligible, there are still some projects that are eligible with fossil fuels, but they're only, for example, extremely efficient combined heat and power. That can, if it's highly efficient, can just get under the 250. Also, we still fund very, very efficient gas boilers for heating in our energy efficiency programs. And we still do some, we are absolutely happy to work with entities that are working with, for example, blending low carbon gases and so on. But conventional fossil fuel infrastructure and conventional fossil fuel power became effectively not eligible for bank financing with our energy lending policy from 2019.
Thank you, Nancy. And this about the statement with the UK? Do you have any?
Okay. Yes. Well, our president published an op-ed before the COP with John Merton from the UK, showing that we were very supportive of the idea of bringing together a coalition, a growing coalition, if you like, of countries and banks that are moving away from fossil fuels. And I do think that it's important to highlight that this is a process. It's a transition. Obviously, it needs to be a fairly urgent transition. In fact, at our press conference on Wednesday, our president said, this is no time to waver. When he was being asked about the urgency, this is no time to waver. But of course, everybody has to make their own transition plans. Each country makes their own transition plans. But I think what we need to understand is everybody actually has to be planning this transition away from fossil fuels. However they do it and however they organize it. So the bank is supporting that. Yes, the bank is supporting that.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I would like now to give the opportunity to all participants, so to all presenters and panelists, to respond to what you've heard so far. So I'm just going to give you a 1 to 2 minutes each, starting with Lucille and in the same order we spoke. So you can have any reactions or any questions that you want, and then I'll open to the next questions that we're getting from the public. So Lucille, do you have any reactions to what you've heard so far or any questions for any of the other participants?
Thanks, Mikel, and thanks a lot to the panelists for the really interesting thoughts that they've shared. I think maybe one of the questions that I would have for each of them is that, a step of the gas, obviously we try to identify the role of international public finance in accelerating the shift towards clean energy development. And Nawaraj has started exploring what this role could be and how international public finance could help accelerate this shift. But I would be really interesting to hear Nancy's thoughts about how the EIB and other MDBs can continue accelerating this shift and how they can overcome the barriers that are already out there. And similarly for Maria, if she sees any specific role from international public finance in that area in Argentina.
Thank you, Lucille. Lima?
Thank you also from my side for these very interesting statements and this interesting debate that we're having here. I think one core element that would also interest me is a little bit to what extent you think that also energy justice concerns or different metrics that monitor also the implementation of transition policies and could come into play when deciding over the funding of projects, for example, or to monitor how a transition is actually implemented within the country, whether you think that's something that would be beneficial to monitor that also on a comparative perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lima. Now, Arash.
Thank you very much. Actually, when we talk about the international finance, basically we need to see it from the two perspectives. One, that comes as an investment, foreign direct investment, or through different channels to develop projects, and other that basically comes to build the capacity of the public and private institutions so that it really helps to build a good ecosystem for the energy sector to move forward and to bring the transition. And one more point that I would like to highlight here is basically the two areas that I mentioned earlier, where we are we have really identified as the key areas that we need to transform in terms of moving in the cooking area from biomass to electric. We really need to work on the ground level more and work more on making the electricity supply reliable. But on the transport sector, it's a quite wide and a lot of the quite range of good range of technologies that we need to introduce. Of course, in cooking also we will need technology, but at the same time we will need to work with the range of players and stakeholders who can be involved at different stages, and the mobilization of finances through different channels would have a very, very important role to play while doing so.
Thank you, Nawaraj. And Maria Marta.
You can call me Maria. Well, about the role of international cooperation, as far as we have been analyzing the case in Argentina, we think that they are part of the misleading of this different, and one said you announce and one said is what you are investing really. For example, the World Bank Group recognizes that climate change as a threat. However, if we analyze the bank's portfolio in Argentina between 2016 and 2020, we observed that direct investment for fossil fuels were 88% higher than for renewables. And also we can watch the IMF, as you was mentioning before, it has an important role in the Argentinian economy. And as the IMF has recently re-emphasized the importance of climate in several reports, in Argentina, it has remarked the importance of export-led growth from the economic export-led growth, highlighting the role that fossil fuels should play in generating foreign exchange. So we need clear rules and clear incentives to shift from the energy matrix based on fossil fuels and an economy based on fossil fuels to this transition. So we think that financial actors should take the lead role to stop financing, subsidizing, and promoting fossil fuels and its infrastructure, and they should encourage clean, equitable, and just energy transition process with an energy matrix that will respect the environment and also the communities.
Thank you, Nancy.
So, I think of so many things I'd like to say in response to the interesting things that people are asking and that we've heard. I think I'll touch on a couple of things. First, somebody asked a very straightforward question about nuclear. Certain types of nuclear power are still eligible. The energy lending policy in 2019 didn't change that from 2013, but the reality is that we almost never fund it, although we have done some important safety investments, but it is still in certain circumstances eligible. In terms of fossil fuels, I mean, I'm very interested in what Marta was saying. I mean, for me, when people ask me this, and my role is as chief climate change expert at the bank, I get asked this inside and outside the bank. And I refer to documents like the IEA Energy Outlook, Global Energy Outlook, which makes clear that for OECD countries, the energy sector has to decarbonize by 2035 and everywhere else in the world 2040. And that is if we have the chance of keeping a safe global warming limit so that people can live healthily and well on the planet, that assets will not be destroyed by extreme weather, and we will not have enormous migration that we cannot manage. So all I would say when people start asking me those things, I say, well, is it compatible with that? Because if it's not, I struggle to understand. I see every country has the right to make its own plans, but that's what the IEA has said. That is the Global Energy Outlook. And I think the other thing to say about fossil fuels is that we still need fossil fuels. There are sectors that we do not know how to decarbonize, right? Or we have some ideas, but it's not available at scale, at cost. International aviation is one. International shipping is another. We're going to need the fossil fuels for those sectors that we do not have a solution for until we find those solutions that we can use, globally at scale. So, but in energy, we do have the solutions. We do. We know what the solutions are. And in fact, in some sectors in transport, we know what the solutions are. So, hearing Nepal talking about going to electric cooking, or electric vehicles, we know that. And in fact, I mean, in Luxembourg, where I live, which is actually, of course, not a developing country, but the Luxembourg city recently won an award, I saw, for cleaner air. And the progress was basically down to having electric and hybrid buses. So I think we also need to reinforce this message that we're not helping poorer people. We're not helping people that are in need of development support by continuing to finance and support fossil fuel industry where we don't need it. And because actually clean public transport that's electrified is cleaner air in cities. Cleaner and more efficient ways of cooking or heating our buildings makes better and safer homes for people to live in and ultimately cheaper to run. And I think that's one of the things that when we talk about a just transition, we also have to think about that. It's not just about jobs for coal miners. It's also about making sure that we don't impose the costs on the poorer parts of society, and instead we let them start to reap some of the benefits. And so that's all I would like to say. I'm sure we could actually, if we were meeting together instead of in this virtual thing, we could probably chat for hours, but I hope you found that useful.
Thank you. And yeah, I do look forward to when we can meet together and chat for hours, because there's so much to talk and it's so much interesting. I'm going to pose a few more questions now. What I'll do is please, if you can be brief answering, but I'm just going to give all of them to you now so you can mull them over while we're talking. So for Nepal, we have a question is, you mentioned that basically you are seeking for international support for 10 gigawatts of power, and rule of thumb is that this is about $10 billion of capital investment. What is that you would need from the financial community, for international community to leverage this? Also, we have, for Argentina, if you could elaborate on the opportunities for the energy transition in Argentina. So you've highlighted the challenges. What are the opportunities? And for the EIB, could you elaborate on the role of intermediaries, financial intermediaries, and how do you ensure that they also do not fund fossil fuels? And then for the presenters, we had two questions for Lima. One was, have you applied energy justice index to a region in Germany or also in any other subnational context? And also the question that justice definitions are culture and context dependent. So how do you address that in your index? And then for Lucille, we heard from Nepal that they are like pushing to leapfrog from biomass to electric cooking, but that requires high taxes of electrification. How do you step off the gas in countries where there's very low electrification rates for cooking, particular? So I'm gonna give the floor to Nawa Raj first because he may have to leave very soon, and then we'll continue with those questions and any others that come. Thank you. Nawa Raj, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Actually, government is very keen to work with all international development partners and financing institutions, giving energy sector as a priority sector for investment, for mobilizing soft loans, and for really building a partnership between the public sector and private sector. As of now, also, we do have nearly 2,000 megawatt of installed capacity of electricity, which is connected to the grid. And private sector is covering nearly half of it. So in the years to come, government is looking ahead to really get the private sector share more than from the public sector. And in terms of developing projects also, we have identified, especially we are rich in hydropower, and we are fortunate to have almost all of our grid electricity supplied from hydropower. And within the hydropower also, there are different categories like run of the river, partial run of the river, and storage type projects. But at the same time, to really promote energy mix, the solar, wind, and bioenergy based projects are also coming up. So looking at the range of projects and in terms of capacity, also few megawatts to thousands of megawatts capacity projects. So looking at the range of projects, range of capacities, and looking at the interest from the international financing institutions or partners who could like to, they might choose whether they want to do smaller projects or bigger ones, do it in hydro or solar. So government is very open to discuss with the partners, and our ministry, which is Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigation, is the leading ministry on that. My institution is working mostly on the small scale renewables and energy efficiency area. And there is a very high level organization, which is Investment Board of Nepal, which is basically working towards building, bringing international finances for bigger size projects. So there are a range of institutional roles has also been defined in a range, so that there won't be any confusion. If some partner would like to bring a smaller amount of money and work in the smaller project area, they can come with us. Middle range, they can come with ministry. In quite a high range, they can go to investment board. So this sort of institutional role division also made it very clear. And we are very hopeful that in the years to come, this will really help to mobilize the international finances as well as mobilize the domestic finances, both from the public and private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawaraj. And any international donors or development partners in the call, take note on how to collaborate with Nepal. I'm going to now give the floor to Nancy. And there was also an additional question for you and Lima on how can address energy justice in finance. Thank you. Your floor is yours, Nancy.
Well, first of all, I should like to say that we do operate in Nepal, and we've done some very interesting projects, financing public and private projects in Nepal. So I'm sure, and I'm looking forward to hearing about new ones. We have our operations officers who work specifically in countries in Asia, and I'm sure that they are probably in touch with the government and other players in Nepal about other opportunities. But since we've put our financing target up now from 25%, which was for 35% in developing countries, we've put it up to 50% of our lending should be green. Most of it will still be climate, but green financing, 50% by 2025. We will definitely be looking for new opportunities in all of the countries where we operate. So hoping to hear more about our financing in Nepal in the future. On climate justice, I would just reiterate what I said, really. There are different elements of justice. And I think that we have to look at where the costs fall. At EIB, we have our environmental and social standards. The social part of those standards for all investments, regardless of whether they're climate investments or they're investments for other sustainable development goals, is incredibly important. They're not optional. And we've actually just it sounds like we're always doing public consultation on something, but in fact, we've just been updating our environmental and social standards, and we've just had a public consultation on that, and we are updating those standards, in fact, by the end of this year. And this is to take account of, indeed, the need to make sure that even when you're looking at climate, you're thinking about gender, you're thinking about human rights, you're making sure that the entities that we work with are actually following through on our standards. So that also requires monitoring from us. But it also means that we have to have commitments in the contracts that we sign with clients, whether they're public or private. It is certainly true when we work with financial intermediaries, then it is a different way of operating. We have to think, how do we work with those financial intermediaries to make sure that our standards are indeed passed on and that the final beneficiaries benefit from the finance and are not disadvantaged. We also have, for example, zero tolerance approach for harassment of whistleblowers or complainants. That's something that the president is very clear about. So I think on a number of fronts, we see that our efforts to pursue climate action must be balanced with, a real focus on human rights and climate justice. And that is true inside the EU and outside.
Thank you, Nancy. We have about 7 minutes left in this discussion, and I've been assured by the organizers that we will be cut off mid-word as the hour tags. So I'll appreciate if the next speakers, you can stick to 2 minutes so we can finish all speak. So I'm going to give the floor to Marta. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I will be really short. I think that the opportunity around energy transition in Argentina is with the development of the long-term strategy that the government is making. We think that this should be considered as an opportunity to phase out fossil fuels, leave behind the misunderstood idea of gas as a bridge fuel. And in fact, we have been analyzing that if the government redirect the fossil fuel subsidies, it could fully cover the cost of a 100% renewable electricity matrix by 2045. So we think that the key is the political will for a transition. Argentina has the technological and ecological potential for an energy matrix to meet social, environmental, and economic needs of our country, with wind and solar energy distributed all over our territory. However, let me just say this short. It is also important to note that our territories may be affected also by the energy transition of the global north. So it is important to remark that a just transition worldwide must prevent the global south from becoming a sacrifice zone once again.
Thank you, Maria. And for those of you in the public who could not see all the participants, when Maria was saying that what is needed is political will, all the panelists were nodding. So I just want to convey that since you could not see it. I'm now gonna give the floor to Lucille.
Yeah, so to quickly respond to your question about cooking and the role of gas, especially when there are low electrification rates. So I think obviously we need to set the priorities, right? The first priority is to provide clean cooking and universal access to clean cooking to populations in the global south. So I think we need to say it crystal clear. And obviously, when we look at the energy transition and the need to wind down the consumption and use of fossil fuels in the coming years, we also need to make sure that the infrastructure that are built to provide this access to clean cooking are not going to lock in countries in the global south in high carbon pathways. And this is why gas is not the right solution for this. And not only it's not the right solution, but increasingly gas cooking is going to face increasing competition from electric cooking, especially because the energy efficiency of cook stoves is increasing and the cost of renewables is also decreasing. So obviously all consumers may not have access already to electricity to operate these electric cooking facilities. Which means that there is a need for further investments, especially into expanding the grid integration and managing the variability of energy source. And this is where international public finance institutions can make the difference to accelerate this shift and make sure that in between the right solutions are provided in the countries of global south to provide this universal access to clean cooking.
Thank you, Lucille. And last but definitely not least, so Lima on energy justice.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just shortly also on the two questions that I've been asked. So one was whether and to which parts of the world we already applied the Energy Justice Index. And we did it so far in 4 countries of the Global South, namely in Kenya, Malaysia, Jordan, and Chile. And we're also looking forward to apply it in further country contexts in the future. So our aim would really be to assess this more broadly for a number of countries. And we already, like doing our application, we always did this in collaboration also with local partners. Because I was also asked whether, justice conceptualizations might not differ across countries and might be maybe also subjective. And so I think through the inclusion of also stakeholders in the different countries and local partners, we try to really also get a feeling on like different conceptualizations. But I think there's also an added value in really creating a consistent metric that can assess energy justice across countries, across different contexts. And we settled on 30 different indicators that assess 3 core tenets of energy justice as a complex concept, including procedural justice, recognitional justice, and distributional justice. And we think that these 3 core tenets really are relevant in all country contexts. And therefore, we also really look forward to do those different comparisons across countries in collaboration, as I said, with local partners in the countries. Thank you very much from my side.
Thank you. And with this, I think it's been an excellent panel. I've learned a lot personally, and we've had all these very interesting contributions. I want to thank all the presenters and the panelists and everyone who's joined, be on the directly channels, on the other channels where this is being streamed, and for your questions. I know we're all very busy with COP, but if you have questions after this, is this trigger something, please do contact the organizers, contact us, follow up. The goal of these events is to start conversations, to continue conversations, to make new partnerships. So even though we're on a remote setting, we should still feel free to do the things that we would normally do on an event. We have about 1 minute, so I'm gonna close soon, but first, if there's anyone who has a burning remark that they need to say, I'm gonna give the opportunity now. Just take the floor. Okay, I see everyone saying not me. So I am gonna close the event. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and happy COP everyone who's there, and safe everyone else from wherever you're joining. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.